Hey, welcome everybody to Elite Sports University. It's Coach John Hofman here today. I have the great honor of talking with Dr. Mark Abel, founder and owner of Tactical Fitness Institute, as well as professor at the University of Kentucky. Also, on top of that, last year was the NSCA's TSAC Practitioner Award winner. So it's a great pleasure here to talk with Dr. Abel. How you doing today, Mark?
I'm doing well, John. Thanks for having me. A pleasure to be here. I appreciate those kind words and that introduction.
Well, it is actually well-deserved. I remember hearing that you and Mick won the award, and I'm like, oh, it's about time someone actually won it who deserved it.
Appreciate that.
So, Doc, we're going to talk about some firefighter fitness stuff, health and wellness. I know that's your area of expertise, but maybe you can talk a little bit about what Tactical Fitness Institute does and some of the areas that you focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Tactical Fitness Institute is an LLC. It's a small business that I developed a few years ago, and it gives me an opportunity to work with municipalities, both fire and law enforcement agencies, to develop educational materials, to develop programs for all levels of operators, and then also to develop legally defensible physical ability tests and fitness tests for selection purposes as well as for incumbents. So those are the primary areas that I work with in that business.
So give us a little bit of background, because you've been actually involved with the TSAC program as well as studying firefighters. I'm actually looking at a few of your studies right now, the one in 2011 and 14 on program design. But maybe give our listeners a little bit of background in how you got involved in the fire service and what led you down this path.
Yeah, that's a great question. So it seems like another lifetime ago when I was graduating high school trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life moving forward professionally. I thought I'd be a smoke jumper, jumping out of airplanes and working in the West and stuff as a wildland firefighter. But realized that probably wasn't going to happen, so I went through our local fire department academy and became a paid-on-call firefighter, and I did that for 2 years while I was going to a community college. At the community college, I took anatomy and physiology, and I'm like, this physiology stuff's pretty cool. So I learned about exercise science. That's before it was as popular as it is now. And, ended up going and transferring to get my undergrad at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse and ultimately my master's in exercise science there. And then ended up out at the University of Utah for my PhD. And after I got done with that, I took my first job has been here at the University of Kentucky in Lexington, Kentucky. I've been here 11 years. And I got a phone call my first year on the job from Dr. Paul Davis, who runs the Firefighter Combat Challenge. Well, Dr. Davis was looking for some assistance in writing a large FEMA grant to enhance the safety of firefighters through training interventions. And so that really kind of opened the door, and it connected a previous world of mine, a passion in the fire service, to the academic side. And so now that's really my area of specialty and expertise is tactical research. How do we improve the lives, the health, safety, and performance of tactical populations? And so now that's what I do for my day job.
That's actually crazy, because we just did a podcast with Dr. Davis, and he's
okay.
A great guy to have. I saw him at TSAC, and he's just
absolutely
a wealth of knowledge, but just a really humble, nice guy.
Yeah, he is. He's a great guy. So we're excited to do some more work with him at the World Championships this October and stuff, some research. So
yeah, he mentioned that, and I'm actually looking forward to all of that stuff. He's got some good things lined up, he told me.
Yeah, he does.
So that's great. Then, so in terms of program design, how did you fall into that area? Was it like a senior thesis that came to you and said, hey, this is something I want to do? Or was it more or less something that you had an idea and thought, here, run with this, student?
Yeah. So, no, it was an idea that I had, and it's all about, all this research is done primarily in recreationally trained individuals. You get some that's done in athletes, but that's kind of a hard population sometimes to gain access to as well. But, with firefighters, they have specific demands and requirements. So how do we train them? It's a legitimate question. And so we worked for 3 years with a local fire department here in Richmond, Kentucky, where I had students helping to train the firefighters. The firefighters were getting free, personal training and so forth. But we wanted to answer the question of what's the best way to train a firefighter to improve occupational performance. And so we've learned some things through that experience, but there are many more questions than answers about the best way. You have your opinion, I have my opinion, and all these things. Everyone has their own, but there's just not a ton of data to support it at this point, beyond those, the speculation and stuff. There's about 4 or 5 training interventions that are out there, and so we have little pieces of the puzzle. But again, there's large gaps in that puzzle. And so we've done some things to start to look at that. And, I'm happy to share some of the findings with you if you want to do that now.
Well, that actually brings me to my next question. From your 2011 study, which was focused on, what did you learn from that to the second one that was kind of like an aha moment of like, hey, I didn't see that before? What were the differences that you really were like, hey, now we're starting to bring these pieces together?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. So I'm going to kind of step back a little bit.
Sure.
I think the way that I kind of look at program design of firefighters is there's 2 different perspectives. There's a microscopic perspective, and that is, how do we train firefighters day to day, on duty and off duty? What's appropriate for them to help them reach their goals, right? And then you have the more macroscopic perspective of stepping back, and in a general program design standpoint, what's the most effective periodization strategy to use to help them meet their goals? So you're kind of looking at this from 2 different levels, and there's a lot of pieces within each. So if you want me to jump into this now, the microscopic thing, so that's where most of our research has been. What's the ideal exercise prescription for firefighters on duty and off duty? And as we were training this particular fire department, the question came up, the bell would ring, they'd get an emergency tone, and they'd leave the gym and run out and put their turnout gear on, and they were on the fire scene within 10 minutes of us training.
Sure.
And so the first thing that came to me is, look, I don't want to be naive. Are they able to do their job now that we just fatigued them on duty, trying to make them to do their job better in the long run? Right? So that was our first study, was looking at the effect of circuit training on duty and what effect did it have on subsequent occupational performance. You get a call right after you're done circuit training. Can you still do your job, right? And so Katie Dennison was one of my graduate students. She published in JSCR in 2012 this paper on circuit training. And what we found there is that we were training these firefighters for at least 3 months. So let's just say that they're moderately trained or pretty close to it, okay? They had some exercise tolerance. We then ran them through a simulated fireground test to assess occupational performance at baseline when they were not fatigued, and then basically 10 minutes after completion of circuit training. And what we found out is that these firefighters slowed down on average by about 9.5% on this timed firefighter specific obstacle course. So that's about a 30-second, change in about a 6 or 7 minute test for most firefighters. So they slowed down. Their work efficiency got a little bit worse. But when we did this study, my big concern was, we're going to publish this, we're going to present it at conferences. The last thing I want to happen is for fire department administrators to look at this and say, look, that's why you should not be training on duty, because you can't do your work as efficiently.
Yeah.
So to put this study in perspective, what we did is we got an additional, 35 or so firefighters that were not exercising with us regularly. And I just had them run through this obstacle course and we timed them. It turned out that our trained firefighters that were working for several months with us, although they got slower by about 9.5%, the average time after exercising was still faster than 70% of the untrained but not fatigued firefighter.
Wow.
So take home point, the fit but fatigued firefighter can outperform most of the unfit, right, but non-fatigued firefighters. So that really put this in perspective, that if you have some level of exercise tolerance, exercising on duty is not a bad thing, and it's going to make you better off from a work performance standpoint compared to the firefighter who says, you know what, I don't want to exercise on duty because I'm going to be too tired to do my job. Well, that's kind of baloney, because after a couple of weeks or months of training, your exercise tolerance and your fitness level will be such that you'll be able to recover enough to do your job. And out of those 35 firefighters, there's about 5 or 6 that couldn't even complete the obstacle course in a non-fatigue state. So all of the guys who had trained, all the firefighters who happened to be male, they were all able to complete it. It just took them a little bit longer on average. So that was kind of the first piece in our puzzle of what type of training is appropriate, on duty, and what's the magnitude of the effect if there is one. And I would, also add to this, we tested them essentially in a worst case scenario, 10 minutes after exercise. Well, maybe by 60 minutes post-exercise, they're back to their baseline. Maybe it's 4 hours, maybe it's 8 hours. We don't know. We don't know what that dose response is, that recovery time. So that's an unknown when I talk about pieces missing here. Right. We don't know what that is. So following that, we conducted two other studies that looked at other types of training. So what are the effects of other types of training, like cardio versus resistance training? And then within a given type of training, what's the effect of a different intensity? What about heavy resistance training instead of circuit training, lower versus high intensity? So a couple of years ago, and these two studies are in the works right now, we're writing them up so that they haven't been published, but they've been presented at NSCA conferences. What we did is we looked at the effect of heavy resistance training. So we used 5 rep max loads. Wow. And we had 5 different compound movements for them. I think we used deadlift, shoulder press, bench press, bent over row, and a kettlebell swing. Oh, nice. 4 sets of each, 5 RM loads. And we had them do that. We had a baseline on their simulated fire ground test. And then 10 minutes post, just like the circuit training, we ran them through an obstacle course. It turned out that they slowed down by about the same amount, about 7%. So it was still significant in that they slowed down. With that particular study, the perspective of, well, what if you lifted heavy off duty and then the next day or two, now you're on duty? But we've all been sore after we lifted yesterday or the day before. Muscle soreness typically peaks about 48 hours post exercise. So can you still do your job adequately then when you're sore, right? So even though they slowed down 10 minutes post, when we brought them back 24 and 48 hours post, they were back to baseline. Good. So exactly, it's suggesting that if you're going to lift heavy, maybe best to do that off duty in an ideal world.
I love that.
Yeah, right. Though you come to the issue of most firefighters probably aren't training off duty. There's a small percentage they'll train off duty, they'll train on duty, but if you're going to get them to do something regularly, you probably got to do it on duty. And so from those two studies, yes, performance was affected by lifting on duty, but my personal opinion is I would still have them lift on duty. I wouldn't take that off the table. Because if you don't do it on duty, the majority of them are not going to do it off duty. So then they're not training, right?
Yeah, you know what? I think that's very important and wise words. The one thing I always have to ask is, what's the call volume? And I try to make things simple with light, medium, heavy. So, yeah, sometimes if you're at a slow station, slow house, we'll do some resistance training. But if you're at a busy house, we'll make the workout called light, and it's a fast circuit.
Sure, absolutely.
The call volume. And now, what kind of shift schedules have you seen, with your studies? Are they 48s? Are they Kellys? Are they?
Yeah, they're all 24-48s, the ones I take that back. The ones in Kentucky are 24-48. The circuit training study was on that, but I did some work in Asheville, North Carolina, and theirs was like 24 on, 24 off, 24 on, 24 off. Then there was maybe 48 hours off. Then there was a day on. There was like 96 hours or 4 days off. I might have a
Kelly schedule, modified Kelly schedule.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. On, off, on, off, off, on, off, on, off. Like
exactly. So just to finish that point up about training on and off duty, we also looked at, we collected data down in Louisiana. Melissa Oftring, who you know, her thesis looked at the effect of endurance exercise on duty. So maybe there's less effect from endurance exercise compared to resistance training. And so in that study, we put the firefighters on a treadmill at 60% of their heart rate reserve, which essentially for most people is a light jog, okay?
Sure.
And we ran them for 30 minutes, and then we gave them 10 minutes and had them run through another simulated fireground test, compared it to baseline. And we also followed up 60 minutes after. So we started to try to get at this dose response, this time period of recovery. How quickly do you recover? Well, in that particular study, it turned out that on average, the group was back down to baseline within 10 minutes, as well as 60 minutes. So at least in that group, it suggests that endurance exercise might be a little bit, it has less of a detrimental effect on work efficiency compared to resistance training. But again, I wouldn't say if I were, a training officer or I were the wellness, strength and conditioning coach for a fire department, I would still lift them on duty. What this all comes back to, and I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's using common sense when you're programming and you're training firefighters. I wouldn't have them do a type of a training, a workout that's novel, that's new to them, because that's going to have a greater impact. It's going to create more residual fatigue, and the less fit they are, the greater residual fatigue, is going to occur. So it's really just common sense. And when you're utilizing new exercises, progressing them into it slowly with low intensities, fewer repetitions, and then working up from there. So a little common sense, I think, goes a long way. But when there's no one supervising that, a lot of times I think it comes down to, well, the firefighter with the biggest biceps must know what they're doing. And so we're going to do that workout, whether it's appropriate for me or not, right? And
yeah, absolutely.
So to brag that you can't get off the floor while you're on duty working out at the end of it is probably not the smartest thing, in the world, as lives are at stake. And it could be your own, but I've had it, I'm sure you've heard it too.
We've seen it, and one of my words of wisdom to those guys are, you can go crazy at your workouts at the firehouse when you can tell me you can predict the call.
Exactly.
There you go. If you can
That's
predict
right.
the call, you can go crazy. Until that, let's
yeah, no, I love it.
Sense.
And that's really what obviously makes, tactical populations, especially fire and law enforcement, so unique compared to athletic populations that we're used to trying to design programs for. But it's a different animal when you can predict when the performance is going to come and when you want to peak their performance, peak their fitness for that moment versus fire. It's a different animal.
That's the challenge, right? That's the variable, unknown variables that you were talking about. Like we can't control those things, and we can't predict the calls. So let's look at what we can control. And, the shift schedule, the call volume usually has some type of rhyme or reason. It's always, the house is always going to be busier. So you can structure it in a manner of light, medium, heavy.
Right. And that's a good point. So, training the day-to-day thing, training during low volume call times, or, if you're an early riser, just before the end of a 7 a.m. shift change, if you can work out at 5 o'clock, that's probably, lower risk of having a call. So, yeah, there are things that you can do, but you need to use a little common sense with it.
Yeah, common sense. What I always found interesting in the fire service was everything is an SOG. Everything has to be standardized.
Yeah.
And I still remember, one of the first days, they wanted to standardize workout time. And I said, we have 25 stations across a big city. That's impossible. You can't tell Station 6 to work out from 8 to 9:30 and tell everybody to do that, because they run, so empower the captains to run their house appropriately.
Right.
It actually worked, and that allowed the captains to go, oh, okay, we can tell them, but we get 90 minutes. We just have to use it at our discretion.
Okay, I think that's a great idea. It's probably not. Go ahead.
It empowered the captain to run his house the way he wanted to run it, and they also valued now the importance of fitness because we empowered them versus telling them. And that was a huge thing. I never understood it until years later. Yeah. But they told me, they were like, that was good because we felt, all right, you're fighting for us. We're going to do this.
Yeah, you got better buy-in from it, huh?
Yeah, and that's interesting when I tell people, don't try to put it in a box because there's too many fire stations. That's impossible. If you put everybody at 8 to 9:30 workout time, 90% of them are going to miss it.
Right.
So you defeated your purpose.
Exactly. Yeah.
So looking at, I was talking to Dr. Alvar not too long ago and some of his studies. And personally, one thing I've always found great that works in the fire service, and I'm looking at your chapter 17 here in the essentials of tactical strength and conditioning. I love undulating training programs when you're developing the program for the fire service. It just seems to me it fits a better model no matter what their shift schedule is. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, boy, this is a great conversation here. This is, it's a very polarizing topic and stuff. But yeah, I totally agree. Undulating periodization, especially for a trained firefighter in terms of their fitness level, It's not great because of the higher intensity and volume overall compared to, say, traditional linear periodization. You got to have some physiological kind of foundation or base to go from before you really implement, I think, undulating or nonlinear periodization. But, Mark Peterson published a study in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research in 2009 demonstrating that undulating or nonlinear periodization was superior to traditional linear periodization, at least over a 9-week period of time. And that was in, I believe, firefighter recruits and stuff. So they were younger and stuff. But no, I mean, when you look at the needs of firefighters, really you need to address the whole fitness spectrum, from strength and power development through muscle endurance, hypertrophy muscle endurance, anaerobic and aerobic capacities. And so how do we do that? How do you optimize all of those throughout the entire year without overtraining them or increasing their risk of injury? And I think nonlinear periodization is a way to do that, where you're stimulating each of the energy systems to train them, and so it's shown to be effective. Again, coming back to the questions, more questions than answers. One of the questions is, well, that's over 9 weeks that we know that it seems to work pretty good. What about 24 weeks? What about 1 year? What about 2 years? I think one of the concerns with nonlinear periodization in athletic populations that have a high training frequency is there an increased risk of overtraining? And so that really needs to be monitored and evaluated, very closely, ideally by a practitioner and stuff. But so I have nothing against it. I support nonlinear periodization, and I think it has a place in the fire service. I tend to also think that block periodization it could be very effective for firefighters to enhance occupational performance. And block periodization, I kind of look at it as somewhat similar to linear periodization in that there's a progression of intensities. But the thing that makes it unique compared to nonlinear periodization is that you tend to focus on a given biomotor ability or a given fitness attribute during a training cycle that could last between 2 weeks and 6 weeks. And so the idea there is that you're optimizing that and you're really reducing this muscle confusion phenomenon that may occur. And that's another topic, and stuff, but there's some molecular research that suggests that there's certainly crosstalk between aerobic and resistance training pathways. That is, increasing muscle hypertrophy has one pathway or multiple pathways that will stimulate muscle size. But then there's another aerobic training. When you perform aerobic training, the primary outcome there in the muscle in terms of a muscular adaptation or peripheral adaptation is mitochondrial biogenesis, so increasing mitochondrial content, right? Well, when you do both aerobic and resistance training at the same time or in the same day or even the same week or microcycle of training, there can be an inhibitory effect from the endurance training that can decrease your ability to increase muscle size. And so we call that the interference effect. Yeah. And so that's a concern that I think that can happen with block training, that can happen with linear or nonlinear periodization, but that's certainly a concern with nonlinear periodization if you have an aerobic training component to it. So anyways, I think block training has its place because it tends to focus on one outcome at a time. And for firefighters let me say one more thing, one of the reasons that you focus on each outcome at a given time is because if you read, Vladimir Iserin has some review articles on this, and this block training really was utilized to train Olympic athletes. So you're very familiar with this type of stuff, right? Yeah. So with Olympic sports, you have these more sporadic, predictable schedules, but they're sporadic, unlike a team sport athlete that has three months of competition period. Olympic sports, you might have to prep, this month, 2 months later, 10 weeks later, 3 months later. So again, there's this, you have to enhance fitness throughout the entire year, similar to what firefighters need, right? And so block periodization is based on this principle of residual training adaptations, in that certain biomotor abilities like basic strength and aerobic endurance it's said that they tend to have a longer training residual, about 30 days. So you focus on those two outcomes first in the initial training phase, the accumulation phase. And then in the second training phase, the transmutation phase, there you tend to focus on glycolytic endurance. So more muscle endurance, think more circuit training type stuff. That has a little bit of a shorter training residual, about 15 to 18 days. So think 2 to 3 weeks. And then finally you go into the final training phase, which is essentially a taper, the realization phase. And there your training is very tactically specific. So you'd be running a firefighter through an occupational obstacle course, for instance. And that would be like their training for that 1 to 2 week period. So it's very short. But the bottom line is I think block periodization is good because it tries to optimize different biomotor abilities, but it doesn't do it at the same time like nonlinear does. It does it, in a sequential manner such that by the time the residuals are decreasing for any biomotor ability, you're coming back into it because the training cycles are as short as 5 weeks to go through all 3 phases to as long as 12 weeks. So who knows? There's no published research on that. And so we just don't know, but they each have their place, and depending on the individual, one might be more appropriate, than the other.
I love the fact that you brought up block training because as a young coach, when I started out, I was a kayaker, and block training was actually focused on sprint kayaking. And that's all I knew. Yeah. And when I got my master's, all I knew was block training. And so I've always found it to be very beneficial in the academy setting. Okay. We had 24 weeks, and I could control the variables, and it was much, much more focused. And it seemed to work for me in terms of block training and the academy. Sure. Really beneficial instead of trying to do everything else. Yeah, we had specific phases, and they were only 2-3 weeks long. Right. And and that was a great place to apply the block training and expose them also to education, different training types, not trying to jam everything into one workout. Sure. And using it as an education tool to promote their wellness throughout their entire life. And so that was something I always found helpful, but not many people understand the block training. So I think you just really gave a good, synopsis of what it actually is. Yeah. And people oftentimes, they go with the traditional, like you said, it's fine. It all works. It all works. As a strength and conditioning coach, we need to know a lot of variables. And for me is, what's your call volume, what's your workload, what do you do outside of the job? Are you a construction worker? Back east, a lot of those guys still work second jobs, not so much here in the West, but that plays an important role in terms of developing their programs instead of making it 2 hours long. You might have to shorten it up to make sure that they do something versus nothing. Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. And your point about, I think a very critical part as a strength and conditioning coach for a fire department or law enforcement agency is the motivation. The strength coach has to be able to motivate and figure out what buttons to push for a given individual because, we're talking about, all these sophisticated training strategies, right? But just about anything you do is going to help them as long as they get off the couch and they do it. Like we're talking about the top couple percent. How do we improve them in terms of performance? But, having them do something that's still on task and it's appropriate, of course, that's important. But the psychological element to it, and I don't want to go down that road here, but it's so important, to motivate. It is. You have to get them to trust you, and you have to be able to push certain buttons. Like you said, we always got to give them what they need, not what they want all the time. Yeah, that's right. That's a good point. So I'm going to actually go off here a little bit. So if you have different priorities, and I always like to look at things in 2 ways. One is the academy, because they're different. The recruits they're fresh, and then you have in-service. If you were to say, hey, here's your priorities: strength, cardiovascular, cardiovascular flexibility. What would you say is the highest priority in terms of the academy? And then what would you say for in-service? That's a good question. And just based off your experience, because, everyone's like, oh, cardio. And in my experience, in the academy, conditioning is the easiest. Really, they get in shape just by running around on the grinder all day. But
Right.
having the strength and even hypertrophy has been enormously valuable in the academy to keep size on them, to keep them injury free, but also give them energy.
Right.
No, I don't want them sticks. I don't
Right.
want them skinny.
Yeah, no, you've hit on, those are some great questions. Let me just start here. I think one of the main concerns, at least locally, my experience has been that, in the academy, risk of injury is, of the utmost concern. We want to be careful if we're going to start training for basic strength and we're going to use free weights, because God forbid, if there's an injury that occurs, that's a lot of money that's being invested in that resource. And if they can't finish the academy, they can't, get out of their probationary period and go back on the line. So, I guess my initial thought is that, teaching education of proper technique so that when we load them, they can still move with a high degree of mobility and move safely. Hopefully that transfers to the fire ground and there's less risk of injury there when they're lifting, equipment off the ground or victims and things like that. So first of all, it's just technique is one thing I think we want to instill in them in the academy and stuff, and everything else will come from there.
Right.
When I look at firefighting overall and the demands, the physical demands of it, if you had to pin me down into prioritizing, right? I'm going to kind of take the easy way out here, but I would probably say that like strength endurance, kind of that combined attribute, it is probably one of the most important. And I would probably prioritize strength endurance. That is the ability to perform fairly vigorous tasks repeatedly, whether that's climbing stairs with 50 pounds of gear and another 50 pounds of equipment, or it's, performing a forcible entry maneuver where there's a lot of power, but it's repeated over and over. Dragging a charged hose line. Again, there's power, there's strength, dragging a victim, power and strength, but it's this repeated thing. If you can deadlift over 500 pounds, so you have plenty of lower body strength, but when you perform, God forbid, multiple tasks in succession with minimal recovery, and you don't have the ability to perform a threshold amount of strength when you get to that third task and you can't do the job, that suggests that it's just not an absolute strength thing. There's anaerobic capacity would probably be my second, and probably aerobic capacity would be my third. I'll give you a good example of this. So my students are going to kill me for sharing this on here. But a couple weeks ago, we were at our fire department training center. And I went out there as part of our class, and we talked about developing occupational physical ability tests. Well, we had a 50-pound weighted vest. I couldn't put them in full turnout gear, but they got to actually perform, multiple occupational tasks in a, controlled environment.
Sure.
And we timed them all. And I got some students in there that look like college linebackers. They're between 195 and 225, pretty well built, and I totally expected that when I ran it, they would kill me. Their times would blow me out of the water. I'm 175 sopping wet, but I have a pretty good anaerobic capacity and aerobic capacity compared to them. But they have a lot more lean body mass than I did. But I still expected they would just kill me based on their stature and body composition. Well, I'm not going to say that I killed them, but I beat them by about 15 to 45 seconds on about a 5-minute course. So that's about a 10, 15, 20%, difference between us. And when I looked at it, we looked at our split times from going up. We started with a stair climb, then we dragged a charged hose line, carried a couple 5-gallon foam buckets, so there's load carriage there, through a ladder, performed a forcible entry maneuver, a search in a room, and then finally a victim rescue. So all those in sequence, no recovery, just walking from one task to the next. But what happened is I was on pace with them after the first couple events, but they didn't have that anaerobic capacity, maybe that strength endurance, or the aerobic foundation, aerobic capacity to continuously perform those high intensity work tasks. I was able to recover a little bit quicker going from task to task. And I think that was the difference. So, again, I used to think that the ideal stature for a firefighter, and I still do with one caveat, would be like a linebacker, type of physique, right? A lot of lean body mass. But the caveat is that if all you do is lift and you don't do some anaerobic / aerobic type training to facilitate the recovery of those, multiple high intensity tasks, you're going to struggle after the first, high intensity task and stuff. So it's really, I was in a debate a couple of years ago, or a discussion, I should say, about, well, what's the requisite amount of strength that you need? Is it absolute strength? Is it relative strength? How do we quantify this? And that's important and it's debatable, but I'm becoming more aware that it's really this combination of other energy systems that allow you to perform these primarily, phosphagen and glycolytic energy system-based tasks, but you have to have the aerobic foundation to recover.
That is, I love the fact that, one, you said education in the academy. So often in my experiences, I've seen academy instructors or other individuals use physical training as a means of punishment or step check. And I'm like, no, it should be about education. First and foremost, you're teaching these young recruits, because if we hurt them, like you said, not only is the city investing a lot of money, but how much time and effort has the recruit put into getting that lotto ticket, as I call it? And this is their livelihood. This is what they're going to work for the rest of their lives. Do no harm, because you're destroying their life, okay?
Right. Yeah.
And the other side of it, in service, I love the fact that you said strength and endurance. I mean, it really is. It's not necessarily a power lifter, and it's not necessarily a marathon runner, but we got to get back into lifting weights, and we have to get back into embracing lifting weights, but in an endurance manner. Like, yeah, you need to be able to be strong and maintain it.
Yeah. A great example of that is I ran the Firefighter Combat Challenge a few years ago. If you go on YouTube, you can watch, an embarrassing performance. But I was training, I did a couple of half Ironmans later that summer. So I was training all aerobic. I wasn't lifting anything. Okay. And I struggled with lower body strength. And then there's also an equipment hoist, on the 5-story tower. And I struggled with that big time because I didn't have enough strength. I think for the, tactical strength and conditioning practitioner, obviously having the requisite education for it, understanding the strength and conditioning and essentially being able to apply that knowledge to a slightly different population, in that it's a tactical population versus an athletic population. But if you understand the components of a needs analysis and addressing the needs that a firefighter has, both from a movement pattern standpoint, an energy system standpoint, and from an injury standpoint, now you can design a program that's appropriate for the firefighter. So I think education is critical. Certainly there are certifications out there that are real important to help in terms of the credentials and make sure you have the requisite information for tactical populations. And so that's another element. And then it's experience. A lot of people now, they want to get into working with military, law enforcement, or fire, but they don't necessarily have experience in those areas. Those that do, I think, have a leg up. They understand the needs of that population a little better. Those that don't need to do a little extra homework. They need to do ride-alongs. They need to spend a couple days at a fire station, right? And understand the demands that are placed on these tactical populations. So I think that experience and even internships is a great way to get your foot in the door for those people who are students, or volunteer if you're not a student, to get your way in. Just like strength and conditioning, it's all based on, having a lot of experiential opportunities and experience that helps you get your foot in the door. So those are probably the primary things: is experience as well as the education piece. And then when you get in there, take your time. Don't be invasive. Get to know who you're training and what they're looking to get out of it, as well.
That's great. You gave me goosebumps because I was having a discussion with Dr. Alvar not too long ago, and we kind of laughed. You've been doing this for quite a while. Myself, he has too, and it's everybody who's kind of been in this field for a while all say the same thing. Like, you have to volunteer sometimes. You actually have to do a ride along. Often we hear from the younger students, hey, I want to do what you do. And you're like, it's not that easy. Like, even with all the credentials and names, you still have to earn their respect. So you have to spend time, which may be volunteering your time at the fire station and understanding what they do.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Still have to do that, even this many years later. You know, meet a new department and you have to spend time with them.
Exactly. Exactly.
Well,
great advice.
Hey, if anybody needed to get a hold of you or wanted to reach out to you, what would be the best way to contact you?
Sure, absolutely. You can email me at Tactical Fitness Institute. It's a long word there, though. Tactical Fitness Institute at gmail.com. Or you can email me at my university address, mark.abel. It's a little bit easier, at uky.edu. Mark.abel, it's ABEL, at uky.edu. So those are probably the easiest ways to get in touch with me.
Awesome, Mark. I thanks a lot for taking the time to do this. This was actually really good. I love doing these things personally because it just reinforces, okay, at least I'm doing something right.
It's my pleasure. Thank you. This is a lot of fun. This is the fun part of the profession, is sharing some of the knowledge and helping to improve practitioners and ultimately enhance the lives of tactical populations, right?
Yeah, it really is. And that's what it really is, making it fun. Are you going to be at Nationals?
I'll be at Nationals. So yeah,
definitely will be seeing you there then, my friend.
That sounds good, John. Well, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
All right, Mark, you take care of yourself. Again, this is Coach Hofman talking with Dr. Abel from Elite Sports University. Take care, Doc, and I do appreciate it again.
Sounds good, John. Thank you.
Take care,
Bye-bye.
buddy.
Bye.